I grew up around farms, but I never worked on one full-time until the summer I decided to help an old family friend named Harris. He owned a huge piece of land far outside of town, the kind of place where the nearest house was so far away you couldn't even see a rooftop. It was mostly fields, old barns, and long dusty roads that went on forever. I took the job because I needed money and because I thought a quiet farm would be simple. Just hard work, fresh air, and long days. Nothing complicated. I drove out there on a hot afternoon in July. The air felt heavy, and the sun looked like a white ball pressed flat against the sky. Harris wasn't around when I got there, so I parked near the main barn and waited for a bit. His truck wasn't there, but the big sliding barn door was half open. I figured he was around somewhere. The place didn't feel abandoned, just empty in a way that made me pay attention to every sound. I could hear insects, the wind scraping across the dry grass, the old metal windmill squeaking as it turned. After a while, I walked around the property just to get a feel for it. The barn looked rough but still solid, with rust crawling up the edges and long scratches on the wooden panels like something heavy had been dragged against it. Behind it were several fenced fields, and all the fences were bent in strange places. Some sections leaned in like something had pressed from the outside. Others pushed outward like something had slammed into them from within. It didn't make sense, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Farms always had broken things. When evening came and Harris still hadn't shown up, I thought maybe I had come on the wrong day. I checked my phone but had no signal. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and the long shadows made the empty farm look even wider and quieter. I didn't want to leave without letting him know I came, so I decided to wait a little longer. That was when I heard something from the far field. It sounded like metal hitting the ground, a dull crash followed by a scraping noise. At first I figured it was a gate that had blown open, but the wind was barely moving. I walked down the dirt path toward the sound, watching the grass shift slowly around me. The field there was fenced off with tall wooden posts and wire, but something was wrong with the gate. It was lying in the dirt like it had been ripped clean off. I walked to the edge of the fence and saw the deep tire tracks inside the field, but they didn't look like normal tractor tracks. They were uneven, messy, like the vehicle had been moving in panic or trying to get out of the field fast. I followed the tracks with my eyes and saw an old feeding shed on the far side. Its roof caved in. The metal sheets were folded inward, sharp and twisted, like something had slammed onto it from above. Rats scurried out from under the broken wood as I got closer, but even they moved like they were frightened. The smell in the air changed. It wasn't the usual farm smell. This was sharper, like hot metal mixed with something spoiled. I covered my nose with my shirt and stepped carefully around the shed. Under the broken boards, something dark had soaked into the dirt. It looked like dried blood, but there was so much of it that it didn't seem possible for it to have come from any normal farm animal. Whatever had happened, it didn't feel like just an accident. Something had gone wrong out here. I backed away slowly and returned to the barn. I wanted to leave, but I also felt a strange pull to check inside before I made any decisions. The door slid open with a loud groan, and the smell inside hit me like a wall. Not death, more like old machinery, oil, and something rotten trapped under heat. I stepped inside and let my eyes adjust. The barn was huge on the inside, with stalls along the walls and a loft above me. Everything was dusty except for one long path across the floor. Something big had been dragged through the dirt recently, leaving a wide smear. I followed the smear without thinking, moving deeper into the barn. The back wall had a small side door that hung open just a little. The smear led right to it. My heartbeat started to feel heavy in my chest as I reached the door. The air around it was colder somehow, and the wooden frame had deep cracks along it like it had been kicked or rammed. Outside the door was a narrow alley area between two barns, where equipment was usually stored. But most of the equipment was gone. Only one thing remained. A broken cattle chute knocked on its side. The bars were bent outward, not inward. Something had pushed its way out with so much force that the metal had curled like soft wire. That wasn't normal. I had helped load cattle before, and nothing could bend steel like that. Not even a big bull. My first real fear hit me then. Someone hadn't just lost control of an animal. Someone had let something dangerous loose, something big enough and strong enough to tear through fences, gates, and metal. And I was out here alone. The sun was nearly gone now, and the whole farm had changed with the light. The fields felt darker, and every sound traveled farther. The insects went quiet all at once, which scared me more than anything I had seen. In that strange silence, I could hear something moving. It wasn't close, but it was steady, slow, heavy steps on dry dirt, coming from the far side of the property. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and ran toward my car, cutting across the dirt path and nearly tripping on a loose board. The sound behind me didn't speed up, but it kept going, slow and steady, like it didn't care how fast I moved. I reached my car, grabbed the door handle, and threw myself inside. The engine struggled at first, and for a second I thought it wouldn't start. But then it did, and I backed up so fast the tires kicked dust everywhere. As I turned toward the main road, my headlights swept across the field. Something was standing just outside the broken gate. I couldn't see its full shape, but I saw its size. Taller than any person, wider than a bull, with long arms hanging near the ground. Its head turned toward the light, and I saw just enough to know it wasn't an animal I had ever seen before. Not on a farm. Not anywhere. I didn't wait to see more. I hit the gas and drove down that long dirt road until the farm shrank behind me. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I tried calling Harris again and again, but there was still no signal. By the time I got back to town, it was late. I went straight home and didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bent fences, the caved-in shed, and that tall shape standing in the dark field. The next morning, I told myself I needed to report what I saw. Not the creature, I knew no one would believe that part. But the broken buildings and the fact that Harris never showed up. It felt wrong to just ignore it. Before calling anyone, I searched the local news online just to see if anything strange had already been reported. That was when I saw it. A small article posted just that morning said the farm had burned down during the night. The fire department hadn't found the owner yet. The barn, the fields, everything was gone except the main house, which had partially collapsed. There was no cause listed. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I didn't go to the property again. I didn't even drive near that part of town for months. Whatever happened there, it started before I arrived, and I wasn't going to get pulled back into it. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and the insects outside suddenly stop buzzing all at once, I remember the sound of those heavy steps in the dirt. Steady, slow, patient, and I wonder if that thing walked away from the fire, or if it's still roaming somewhere out there on empty land where no one goes anymore. I don't think about farms the same way now, and I never will again. I took the farm job because I needed the money and because I thought nothing truly bad ever happens on a farm. I had always pictured farms as open, peaceful places with quiet mornings and long, slow days. But the farm I worked on last autumn changed the way I think about quiet places forever. It made me realize how silence can feel heavier than noise and how wide empty land can make you feel trapped in a way you don't expect. The owner had hired me for 2 weeks to keep watch over the property while he traveled. He needed someone to feed the animals, check the fences, and lock up the barn every night. He said it was easy work. When I arrived on the first day, I understood why he needed help. The farm was huge. The fields stretched so far in every direction that they seemed to melt into the horizon. The house sat alone in the middle, with a long dirt road twisting toward it. A barn stood about 60 yards behind the house, and there were 2 old sheds farther out, almost swallowed by tall grass. Everything looked normal at first, but the place had an odd stillness to it. The animals barely made noise. Even the wind seemed weak, as if the air itself was tired. I felt it on the first day but didn't think much of it. Farms are isolated. Isolation brings quiet. That was my explanation. The first couple of days went by smoothly. I followed the routine the owner left for me. Wake up early, feed the cows, collect eggs, check the barn, walk the fence line, lock everything at night. I tried to keep myself busy, and the work helped distract me from how empty the property felt. At night, I stayed in the spare room inside the farmhouse. I slept light because I wasn't used to the old building's noises, but I still managed to rest. Then things started changing slowly, almost too slowly for me to notice right away. One morning, when I went to the barn, I saw the sliding door slightly open. I remembered closing it tight the night before. The ground outside the barn looked disturbed, but the soil was dry, so I couldn't see any clear tracks. Inside the barn, everything looked normal except for one thing. A metal bucket that usually sat on a shelf was lying on the ground, dented on one side. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt wrong. Buckets don't just fall on their own in a closed barn. I fixed the door, put the bucket back, and tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. Later that same day, I checked the fence line on the far end of the property. That section ran along a narrow strip of woods. I walked slowly, tapping each post to see if any were loose. When I reached the middle part of that section, I found a long stretch of wire pulled down. Not broken, just dragged down to the ground. The grass around it was flattened, as if something heavy had moved through it. I didn't see hoof prints or tire marks, just long, smooth patches in the grass. It made no sense. I fixed the wire as best as I could and walked back quickly. I felt watched the whole time. I kept scanning the trees, expecting someone, or something, to be standing between them. But nothing was there. Just trees, the sound of my footsteps, and the faint smell of old leaves. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. The house made more noise than usual. The wooden frame creaked like someone was shifting their weight against it. Around midnight, I heard something outside, slow steps on gravel. I lay still in the bed staring at the ceiling, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just one of the cows wandering too close to the house. But cows don't walk that quietly, and cows definitely don't stop for long periods like they're listening. When I finally forced myself to look out the window, the yard was empty. The barn looked dark and still. The gravel path looked the same as always. But I knew what I heard. Something had walked past my window. Something with weight. The next day, I checked the barn again. This time, the sliding door was open wider than before. Inside, more things were moved. A feed bag was torn open, but not ripped apart like an animal attack. It looked sliced cleanly, like it had been cut with something sharp. A shovel had fallen over. A heavy toolbox was sitting in the middle of the floor instead of on its shelf. And at the back of the barn, near the far stall, the floor had deep drag marks in the dirt. It looked like something had been pulled, dragged, or pushed across the floor in a straight line. I crouched down to look closer. The marks were too wide to be from a tool and too clean to be from an animal. My chest tightened again. The barn felt colder than outside, as if the air inside didn't move at all. I left quickly and spent the rest of the day outside near the house, avoiding the barns and sheds as much as possible. But that night, things got worse. I tried to sleep early, hoping exhaustion would knock me out despite my nerves. But around 1 a.m., the noises returned. They were louder. This time, I heard the barn door slam softly against its frame as if something nudged it. Then came the dragging sound, the same slow, gritty scrape I had seen evidence of on the barn floor. It moved across the yard, stopped, and then started again, heading closer toward the house. I lay frozen in bed. My breathing felt too loud. The dragging continued until it stopped right outside the house. The gravel crunched under weight. My window was closed, but I felt cold air crawl across my skin like the house itself knew something was outside. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. I didn't look outside, couldn't. When the sound finally moved away, heading back across the yard toward the barn, I let myself breathe again. I stayed awake till sunrise, listening to every sound the old house made. In the morning, the yard showed the proof of what I'd heard. The gravel near the house had fresh tracks, long, smooth trails like something had slid or been pushed. The ground closest to the barn was disturbed too. The marks were straight and deep, cutting across the entire yard. I followed them slowly, looking around constantly. My heartbeat stayed tight in my chest. When I reached the barn entrance, I saw that the door was fully open again. Inside, more dirt was shifted. The drag marks went all the way to the back stall, then disappeared into the far corner where the boards looked cracked. I didn't step inside. I stayed at the door and stared for a long time. The smell in the barn was stronger than before. A sour, chemical odor mixed with dirt and old wood. It made my eyes sting. That was the moment I knew I needed to leave. I didn't wait for the evening. I packed my clothes, grabbed my phone charger, and tossed everything into my truck as fast as I could. I didn't even check the sheds. I just wanted to get off that property before the sun went down. As I was about to drive away, something caught my eye near the far field. A long shape was lying on the ground, half buried in the tall grass. I told myself not to look, but my curiosity pulled me closer. When I reached it, I realized it was a heavy wooden beam, one of the beams that had been part of the back corner of the barn. Something had ripped it clean off. It wasn't old wood. It wasn't rotting. It had been torn from the barn with force. Seeing that made everything inside me twist. There was no question left. Something strong was living on that farm. Something real. Something that moved at night, dragged things around, ripped boards from barns, pushed fences down, and walked slowly around the house while I pretended to sleep. I left and didn't look back. I drove until my hands stopped shaking, until the farm was far behind me. When I finally called the owner, he didn't sound surprised. He only said he'd handle it. I don't know what he meant by that. I don't want to know. What I do know is that the farm's silence wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that comes when something is hiding on a property. Something big, quiet, and patient. Something that waits for the dark. And the worst part is that I never saw it. Sometimes the things you don't see are the ones you remember the longest. I was around 14 or 15 when this happened, still at that age where I thought nothing bad could ever really happen to me as long as I was with a friend and holding a flashlight. My family used to camp at the same state park every summer. It wasn't anything special, just a mix of pine woods, dirt trails, an old lake, and a campground that always smelled like smoke and bug spray. But back then it felt like the whole world. Every night after dinner, after the adults got lost in their own conversations, my friend and I would leave the campground and disappear into the trees. We called it the ritual. It made us feel older than we were, like we had some private adventure that only we understood. We didn't do anything exciting. Mostly we'd walk, kicking through dry leaves, shining our small flashlights up at the branches, trying to see if we could find owls or raccoons. Some nights we'd turn off the flashlights and try to move through the dark without tripping. It made us feel brave. The woods were different with the lights off. Every sound became sharp. Every shadow looked thicker. But we kept doing it night after night until it felt normal. Most nights we stayed close to the campground, maybe a 5-minute walk in. We could still see the glow of campfires through the trees, and the distant hum of people talking made the woods feel safer. But that night we decided to go deeper. I don't know why. Maybe we were bored. Maybe we were trying to prove something to ourselves. The woods felt extra quiet that night, and the air had that cold bite that settles in after the sun drops. The kind of air that makes you hear your own breathing. We walked farther than we ever had before. The trees grew taller and the ground got more uneven, filled with roots and little dips that made us watch where we stepped. We were far enough in that the campground noise had completely disappeared. No more fire crackling, no laughter from other campsites, no clanking of pots or someone dragging a folding chair. It was just the woods and our footsteps. Eventually, like we usually did, we turned off our flashlights to see how long we could last. When the darkness closed around us, it felt thicker than usual, almost like it pressed on my shoulders. I remember blinking a few times just to adjust, but the woods were pitch black. The only light came from the faint outline of the sky through the branches. We walked slow, feeling for the ground before each step. I kept one hand out in front of me, just in case. We were maybe half a mile from the nearest campsite when I heard it. Soft whispering, not words I could understand, not even loud enough to guess the tone. Just a faint, breathy noise behind us, like someone trying to speak but holding their voice back. At first I told myself it was wind through the trees, or maybe a deer moving through leaves. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like something trying to form words. My chest tightened and all the small hairs on my arms stood up. Instinct kicked in. I switched on my flashlight and spun around so fast I almost slipped on a root. My friend did the same. Our lights cut through the darkness, slicing between the trees, hitting trunks, ferns, and uneven ground. But nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. I told myself I probably imagined it. The woods could play tricks on you when you took away your sight. We kept walking a little faster this time, and the idea of turning the flashlights off again was gone. Neither of us said it, but we both felt it. Then we heard it again. This time it was slightly louder. Still soft, still whisper-like, but clearer. We stopped dead in our tracks. I felt frozen in place, every part of me alert. I scanned the darkness behind us with my light, slower this time, making sure I covered every inch. My friend did the same. I didn't see anything, but I had that heavy feeling you get when someone is watching you. That pressure in the back of your neck that makes you want to turn around over and over again. We finally decided to head back. The woods didn't feel fun anymore. They didn't even feel like the same woods we had walked through 100 times. They felt tight and wrong, like something cold had started moving between the trees. As we turned to leave, something caught my eye. A shape on the ground maybe 20 yards away. At first I thought it was an animal because it was low and hunched. But the longer I stared, the more it looked like a person. My chest felt like it dropped into my stomach. It was a woman, crawling. She was moving slowly, dragging herself across the ground, her clothes dark and covered in dirt. I couldn't see her face at first, just the outline of her body and the way her arms pulled her forward. The whispering sound was coming from her, but it didn't sound like words. It sounded like thoughts leaking out of someone who wasn't fully aware of what they were doing. I felt frozen. My brain couldn't make sense of the image in front of me. Nothing in the woods should crawl toward two teenagers in the dark. Nothing should whisper like that. For a moment, I thought maybe she was hurt, or maybe she was dangerous, or maybe both. Then she lifted her head. Her face was smeared with dirt, streaked across her cheeks and forehead. Her hair looked tangled like she had been rolling on the ground. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, like she was trying to find something but couldn't lock onto anything. Standing there in the woods with my flashlight beam shaking over her face, I felt more scared than I ever had in my life. Something about the way she moved didn't seem right. Something about the way she stared made the whole forest feel wrong. She slowly pushed herself to her feet. I could see her legs wobbling like she had been crawling a long time. She kept whispering, but it still didn't make sense. It was just broken sounds. She looked like someone who had been wandering the woods for hours without knowing where she was. She wasn't threatening. She wasn't angry, but there was something deeply unsettling about the whole moment. Seeing someone like that, alone, dirty, crawling toward us in the dark woods, whispering to herself, it felt like a scene from a nightmare, but it was real. We ended up guiding her back toward the campground. She couldn't walk straight, and she moved like every step confused her. The whole way back I kept looking around, checking the trees, checking the shadows, half expecting something else to appear. But it was just us, the woman, and the dark. As we got closer to the lights of the campground, the woods slowly started feeling normal again. The trees didn't seem as tight. The air didn't feel as heavy. The whispering stopped. She walked a bit steadier, like the sight of nearby campsites gave her something to focus on. When we reached the campground area, we tried to help her find her group. Took a while. Most of the campsites were quiet, and people were already inside their tents or around dim fire pits. We kept walking with her until we finally found a group of people who recognized her. They hadn't even noticed she was missing. She had just tried to find a bathroom and wandered into the woods in the wrong direction. She was extremely drunk, maybe high too, and had ended up deeper in the forest than she realized. The relief I felt when her group came over to get her was something I can still remember in my chest. She wasn't dangerous. She wasn't some creature or anything like that. She was just a person who got lost in a place that becomes terrifying the moment you lose control of your surroundings. That night changed how I looked at the woods. Before that, they were just a dark place we walked through for fun. After that, I understood how quickly things could go wrong. How easy it is to get turned around, to panic, to lose your sense of direction. And how sometimes the scariest things in the woods aren't animals or shadows or strange noises. Sometimes it's just another human being who wandered too far and lost themselves in the dark. Looking back now, I realize how lucky she was. If we hadn't walked that far into the woods that night, she would have stayed there crawling and whispering for who knows how long. The temperature dropped that night. She wasn't dressed for the cold. She wasn't thinking clearly. She could have ended up miles away from any trail, deeper and deeper into the forest, until morning came and nobody knew where to even start looking. The thing that still sits with me is how quiet everything was before we heard her. No crunching leaves, no branches breaking, no breathing, just that soft whispering out of nowhere in the middle of a huge dark forest. Sometimes I think about how long she had been out there, how many times she might have crawled close to a trail, whispering to herself, hoping someone would hear her. Even now, years later, whenever I camp, I never walk the woods in the dark without a light on. The darkness isn't a game anymore. That night taught me that you never really know who else might be out there, stumbling around, lost, scared, whispering things you can't quite understand until your flashlight finally lands on them. And sometimes the fear you feel doesn't come from danger. It comes from the realization that the only thing separating safety and disaster is a few wrong steps in the dark. I took a part-time farm job last September because I needed extra money and the old man who owned the place was paying well for simple work. The farm sat far outside of town, surrounded by long dirt roads, empty fields, and patches of woods that looked darker than they should have in the daytime. The place always looked like it was holding its breath, quiet, wide, and strangely tense even on sunny days. I didn't mind that at first. I liked working alone. The job was mostly feeding livestock, checking the water pump, and walking the fences. It was routine work, boring work, but it paid more than it should have. I figured the owner was just being generous because he couldn't keep up with the land the way he used to. He limped when he walked, and his hands shook when he used the tools, so I didn't question it. After a few weeks, I got used to the rhythm of the place. The mornings were bright and loud with insects. The afternoons were long and dusty, and the evenings always grew colder than expected. I learned the layout of the barns and fields, and I felt comfortable walking around the property alone. But there was one place I didn't like, the eastern field. It was bigger than the others, with a long rusted gate that didn't close properly and grass that grew uneven, like something heavy dragged through it often. There were thin paths in the dirt that didn't match tractor marks or animal trails. They cut across the field in strange directions, long and shallow grooves that looked almost like someone pulling something behind them. I avoided that field unless I absolutely had to go there. I didn't know why. Nothing ever jumped out at me or ran across my path. It was just the feeling, like that part of the land had been touched by something rough and violent that wasn't there anymore but still left its weight behind. One evening, the owner told me he'd be away for 2 days. He needed me to check everything, lock the barns, and make sure no one trespassed. I didn't think anyone would trespass way out there, but I agreed. The extra pay was too good to pass. I showed up the first evening a little before sunset. The sky was already turning pink, and the long shadows stretched across the yard in a way that made everything look older and more worn down. The barns looked darker inside. The chicken coop felt strangely still. Even the cows seemed restless, moving more than usual, kicking up dirt in slow circles. I fed them, checked the water, and started walking toward the fences. The wind had died completely, and the air felt thick. I could hear every step I made, every soft crunch of dirt under my boots. I didn't realize how loud footsteps could sound when everything else around you is silent. It almost felt like someone was matching my rhythm a few steps behind, but whenever I stopped, nothing followed. The last fence I had to check was, unfortunately, the eastern field. By the time I reached it, the sun was almost down, leaving only a low orange glow behind the trees. The field looked even more uneven than usual. The patches of grass seemed pushed down in different directions, like something huge had rolled or been dragged through the same paths again and again. Some parts were pressed so deep that the dirt underneath looked freshly churned. I walked along the fence slowly. The wire was old, but it was sturdy. At least I thought it was, until I reached the far corner. The last post had been split, not cracked from age. Split clean down the middle like someone had hit it with a sledgehammer or rammed into it with full force. The wire was torn open, ends twisted outward. I crouched down to look at it, and that was when I noticed the impressions in the dirt. They were deep, long marks, not shaped like footprints, not shaped like hooves. Just long dents pressed in random angles, as if something heavy had been dragged by someone moving fast. Something that left no clear identity, just weight. My mouth went dry. I kept looking back toward the field, expecting to see something, but the grass just shifted slowly in the remaining light. Nothing moved, but every part of me felt watched. I fixed what I could, even though it wouldn't hold long, and then I started walking back. The air was darker now, almost cold, even though the day had been warm. I kept moving quickly, focused on the distant lights of the barn. But halfway across the path, I stopped. There was a sound, a long, slow scrape across dirt. Not footsteps, just one dragging sound, heavy and rough, somewhere behind me in the field. I didn't turn around yet. I stood still, staring at the barn lights far ahead, and listened. The scrape came again, longer this time, like something sliding across dry ground. Then silence. My hands were shaking. I finally turned, but the field looked empty. Just dark grass and long shadows. I forced myself to move, walking quickly at first, then almost running as the wind picked up in a sudden, sharp gust that rustled the grass all at once like something big had been pushed through it again. When I reached the barn, my heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. Inside the barn, the animals were acting strange. The horses paced in tight circles, huffing and shifting constantly. The cows stood facing one direction. All of them pointed toward the eastern field, as if waiting for something to come up from the dark distance. I had never seen them behave like that. Animals don't fake fear. I locked the barn doors carefully, sliding the metal bar across with hands that wouldn't stay steady. I didn't look out toward the fields again. I hurried to my car and turned the headlights on, letting the yard flood with white light. And in that second, I saw it. Not clearly, not enough to name, but enough to know something was there. Just at the edge of the eastern field, standing near the broken section of fence where I had been minutes earlier. A tall shape, not shaped like a man, but standing like one. Broad, slightly hunched shoulders, long arms hanging too low. It didn't move. It didn't run. It just stood there facing the barn. I slammed the car into drive and left the property fast, kicking up dirt behind me. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel the whole way back to town, and even when I reached streetlights and traffic, I didn't feel normal. My chest felt tight. My skin felt cold. My mind kept circling back to the shape, the dragging sound, the broken wood. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back the next day either. I kept ignoring the owner's calls because I didn't know how to explain what I saw without sounding insane. Eventually, after 2 days of avoiding him, I checked the news. There was a small report. Livestock missing. Fences destroyed. Strange activity reported at rural farm. Sheriff investigating. My stomach dropped when I saw the picture of the property. The eastern field was in the background. The fence I repaired wasn't there anymore. The entire section had been torn down. The article said the ground looked like it had been dug up by heavy equipment. But no equipment was found on site. They never figured out what happened. I didn't offer any help. I quit the job quietly and never returned to that side of the county. Now, months later, I still think about those dragging marks, the broken post, and the tall shape standing in the field like it had been waiting for me to leave. And when I drive past any open farmland at night, I can't help scanning the empty rows of grass and dirt, looking for something I hope I never see again. Because whatever walked across that field that night was real. And I know it's still somewhere out there, crossing quiet farms after dark, leaving long dragging marks behind it that no one understands until it's too late. I took a temporary job on a farm last fall because I needed quick money and the place was only a 20-minute drive from my apartment. It wasn't a fancy farm or anything modern. It was the kind of old property where the house looked tired, the barns leaned a little to the side, and the fields stretched so far you couldn't tell where they ended unless the sun was hitting them just right. The owner, an older man named Dale, said most of the work would be simple: checking fences, feeding the animals, and keeping an eye on things when he wasn't around. I didn't think anything strange of it at first. The area was quiet, surrounded by trees and wide empty roads. It felt peaceful, almost dull, which I liked. But the farm also felt too big for one person to manage. The main barn was huge, the workshop smelled like oil and old iron, and there were fences stretching far into the back fields. You could stand at the house and see nothing but land in every direction. No neighbors, no nearby houses, just empty space. My first week went normally. I showed up around sunrise, did small tasks, and left in the early evening. But even from the beginning, something felt off with the back field. The grass there grew unevenly, almost patchy, and the ground dipped in certain spots, like something heavy had pressed into the soil over and over. I didn't pay attention at first, thinking maybe animals had caused it. But the holes were too deep and too far apart. On the 6th day, I got a text from Dale saying he'd be gone overnight for an appointment in another town. He told me to lock up the barn after I finished feeding the cattle and to check the backfield fence if I had time. That message made me pause a little. The backfield fence was old and long, the kind of chore that took hours. But I told myself it was fine. I needed the money. A quiet evening on a quiet farm sounded easy. I drove out there just before sunset. The light was orange and low, and the buildings cast long shadows across the yard. The animals were calm, feeding quietly, and everything felt so still that I could hear the wind brushing through the dry weeds. I did the usual tasks first, then headed toward the back field with a toolbox in my hand. The walk felt longer than usual. The path had tire ruts from old tractors, and in some spots the dirt was kicked up like something had run across it. The grass bent in weird directions, not flattened like animals had walked through it, but twisted around itself, like feet had dragged through it in a hurry. The closer I got to the far fence, the more uneasy I felt, though I couldn't explain why. The air felt heavier, the wind stopped, and the silence grew so thick that even my footsteps sounded wrong. When I reached the fence, I saw the problem immediately. 3 fence posts had been knocked sideways, not loosened, but pushed in a way that snapped the wood near the base. The wire was torn and curled around the fallen posts like it had been ripped by something strong. Not cut, ripped. The torn ends were sharp and twisted. I crouched down and touched one of the snapped posts. The wood was fresh, not old rot. Whatever broke it happened recently, and then I saw something that made my chest tighten. On the dirt nearby were 2 sets of prints. One set was from cattle. The other set, I didn't know. They were deep, uneven, and wide, like someone had stepped hard but had dragged their feet each time. They weren't shaped like animal hooves. They looked more like long dents in the dirt. A cold feeling went up my spine. I looked out into the back field, and even though nothing moved, I felt like something had been there not long before I arrived. I started working on the fence because I didn't want to stand still any longer. The sun kept dropping, and the field darkened faster than I expected. The air cooled sharply, and my hands felt clumsy against the wire. I kept glancing behind me, checking the tall grass, the tree line, the shadows. I didn't hear anything, but I felt like I was being watched. By the time I finished, the sky was nearly dark. The farm lights were still far behind me, and walking back felt like crossing an open space where anything could step out of the tall grass if it wanted to. I walked faster than normal. Halfway back, I froze. There was a sound behind me. Something slow, dragging across dirt. Not footsteps, not running. Dragging. A long pull, like something heavy being dragged by someone not strong enough to lift it. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My body felt locked, but my legs kept moving on their own. Every instinct in me said not to turn around. I kept walking until the barn lights became bright enough that I felt safer. When I finally stopped and gathered the courage to look over my shoulder, there was nothing there. Just the empty field behind me, but the grass looked bent in a long trail, like something had moved through it. I told myself I was imagining things. I headed toward the barn to lock it like I was supposed to. Inside, The air smelled old and dusty. The cattle in the far stalls shifted around with restless movements. It wasn't feeding time, and they usually stayed still, but tonight they acted nervous, lifting their heads and turning in small jerks. Animals know things before people do. I've always believed that, and it made my stomach tighten even more. I checked the stalls, made sure everything was closed, and then went to the large sliding doors. Before locking them, I peeked out toward the field one more time. That's when I saw it. Something stood near the edge of the far field, almost too far to see clearly. It wasn't shaped like an animal, too tall, too narrow. Not a human either, not with shoulders that wide and a posture that leaned forward like someone who had lived their whole life carrying something heavy. It didn't move. It just stood there facing the barn. The darkness made the shape blend into the field, but the outline was enough to make my chest tighten painfully. My hands shook as I locked the barn doors. The metal latch rattled too loudly in the quiet night. I didn't breathe until I reached my car. When I turned the key, the headlights lit up the yard and part of the field. The shape was gone, but the grass where it had stood was bent flat, almost in a wide circle. I drove away fast. The road felt endless, and the darkness outside the headlights felt like it was pressing in. I didn't slow down until I was back on the paved road near town. Even then, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something walking down the road behind me. I didn't go back to the farm the next morning. I didn't even text Dale. When he finally called later that day, I let the call ring out. I didn't want to explain anything because I didn't even understand it myself. A few days later, I checked the local news online and saw a short article. Something had happened on the farm. The backfield fencing had been destroyed, the cattle were missing, and the sheriff's department had visited after a neighbor reported strange noises during the night. No details, no explanations, just a simple note saying the investigation was ongoing. I never returned. I never asked what they found, and I still avoid that part of the county when I drive anywhere. Sometimes, though, when I'm outside at night and the wind stops suddenly, I remember that dragging sound in the dirt. Slow, heavy, intentional. Whatever I saw on that farm wasn't supernatural. It was something real, something dangerous, something that walked on 2 feet and moved with a purpose. And I know it's still out there somewhere, moving through fields no one watches closely, on nights when the wind falls quiet and the dark corners of empty land feel deeper than they should.